I think it was last year that I started becoming more diligent about keeping journals and keeping notes on the things that I was consuming, whether it was a book, an article, a podcast I had just listened to, or a film in which there was something that I noticed, something that I didn't understand, something that I wanted to remember or learn more about. And I think that this did many things, but I think two of the things that are relevant for this video is that the first one, it kind of slowed down my consumption of media, because even though I had become more intentional about what I was consuming, I think a lot of the things that I consume are things that are really interesting to me. The reality was that I was just consuming such enormous quantities of it, which makes it really hard to absorb anything or learn anything in a deeper way. And the second thing, which I like to mention often, is that it allowed me to find similarities and patterns and make connections. So these kind of like fragmented pieces of information that I was consuming kind of became more so part of a story that I could connect and make sense of. The thing is that our environment, the environment we find ourselves in right now, trains us to engage with the world at a certain depth. So right now with mass media, we are trained to jump from one article to the next, one headline to the next, not engaging with anything too deeply at any point in time. I've been reading a lot of Byung-Chul Han recently, and he's a massive inspiration for this video, so I'm going to mention him throughout. But he suggests that narrative or storytelling is under threat, that right now we're living in a serialized, denarrativized form of communication that fails to provide any meaning or stability. So a lot of us are just consuming vast amounts of information that is only providing stimuli and is not providing any sort of real meaning. And this compulsion for newness and this compulsion for constant stimulation kind of erodes our bonds of shared experience that make up meaningful narrative, that make up meaningful story. Before I continue, I just wanted to give a big thank you to Linear for sponsoring this section of today's video, which is the jewelry that I'm wearing today. Linear makes high quality jewelry that is made to last, and if you know me, you know that once I find a piece of jewelry that I really love, I will wear it day in and day out, which makes it for me very important to find jewelry that is going to last me a long time, because I think that that's the point of jewelry. Linear makes high quality jewelry whilst keeping the cost low by avoiding large markups that make traditional luxury products incredibly unaffordable. One of Linear's core values, which I really appreciate, is their sustainability efforts. They use sustainable and recycled materials like 100% recycled gold and 100% recycled silver, and they also use lab-grown diamonds, which means that they are guaranteed conflict-free. I brought 2 pairs of earrings with me traveling. They're earrings that I got at the beginning of this year, and I used them every single day on my 10-day through hike through the Lofoten Islands. So they have, they've survived. They've been with me through rain, shine, wind, beside me on every top of every mountain. And I just loved really being able to use jewelry as I was hiking and feeling really grotty, and then being able to have my little very delicate and beautiful earrings on. I have now added some golden rings to my collection, which I've been really loving and I've been wearing almost every day now. If you use the link in the description box below, you can get a special offer by using my discount code, which is Nina_Montagnier, and you can get some wonderful Linear pieces. You can get some for yourself or for someone else. I think it's the perfect gift, especially how the holiday season is coming, a gift for someone else or a gift for yourself. And thank you so much to Linear for sponsoring this video. I made a video a while back on how note-taking and having research projects and running these little experiments for myself kind of led me to feel less despair. And I think it's because of just that. I was taking all these kind of like data points, all these fragments, and integrating them into a narrative that pulled from my own experience and pulled from my own memory, and just made it more meaningful. It made it more whole, and it made me also engage with the world in a more active way. And I think there's a big satisfaction that is derived from serious engagement, that is derived from engaging with different thoughts and different ideas and emotions and people. When Han talks about the crisis of narration, he is also talking about the crisis of the self. And I think that this comes from our degradation of memory, which isn't just the loss of like certain specific events that we don't remember or certain specific recollections, but the erosion of memory's fundamental role in shaping our own identity and enabling that connection, that deeper connection with ourselves and others. A richer memory makes us richer, deeper people. And yet, the conditions that we find ourselves in kind of undermine this capacity, our capacity to form, retain, and work with memories in ways that construct a coherent identity and a coherent story. Stories are fundamentally communal and connective. For as long as people have existed, stories have rooted people in place. They have provided accounts of origin. They have connected people to their past and often enabled people to imagine a more hopeful future. Through story, people understand themselves, and through stories, traditions and rituals are passed down that create a stronger sense of self and a stronger sense of identity. Stories have a wonderful way of connecting past and present and future in ways that make life feel meaningful. Stories give people meaning. Storytelling depends on memory, and at the same time, it shapes it. So as humans, we love to reminisce, we love to think about the past, and I think this goes beyond this emotion that we all seem addicted to, nostalgia. I think it's more of a fundamental practice through which we construct and reconstruct our sense of self or our identity. When we remember something and when we write it down and when we integrate it in a way in which it becomes more than just the event that happened, the experience deepens and it integrates more fully into our identity. Right now, however, we find ourselves in a time where storytelling is replaced by what Han calls story selling. And story selling is basically these very easily digestible pieces of content that follow a very predictable narrative that is geared towards drawing people's attention in order to profit off those people. So these are kind of like fragmented moments that exist without any meaningful context or any context at all. And the way we consume these bits of information, the way that we consume these data points is almost without reprieve. There is no moment to engage with any of it deeply. Not that a lot of it requires any deep engagement, but the things that do, there is no time to reflect or contemplate or kind of understand the moment in terms of a whole or in terms of a story. We are living in a time, I mean, it's obvious to all of us that it is very, very poor in these in-between moments, these moments of interruption between one thing and another. As soon as you listen to a podcast, the next one is on autoplay. You listen to an album and then you go straight to watching a show. And then from a show, you go straight to, reading a book. There is very little time to reflect on anything. There rarely even is the desire to just, slow down enough to let the experience or the information kind of settle in order for that to be integrated into some sort of narrative. And I'm not saying that everything has to be part of a narrative and everything has to be part of a story, but I think we're finding ourselves on this extreme where nothing is anything and we're all kind of struggling to find meaning. That's, I think, mostly what scares me, is this feeling that life is devoid of meaning. Walter Benjamin talks about deep boredom, which is profound idleness. And this idleness and complete mental relaxation is what gives way to creative thinking, to integrate what you've learned, what you've seen, what you have felt, what you have experienced in something that goes beyond the present moment, something that can connect past and present and future. The thing is, right now, any moment of potential silence or potential emptiness is now an opportunity for stimulation. And this happens to me all the time. Even when I go for a walk, the first thing I do is grab my headphones and put them in order to listen to something. And this has direct implications on my memory, I'm very sure. Memory formation requires the brain to have time to consolidate experience, to process and integrate new information with existing knowledge. The constant stimulation of social media and interrupts this consolidation process. We move from one experience to the next, to the next, to the next, without allowing any of it to settle into our memory. So the result is like this very strange paradox in which we document everything and remember nothing, because what we're doing is just saving things. Saving things for later, going to the next thing, saving that thing for later, the next thing, saving that for later, and then we remember nothing. It's so often the times that I forget the things that I did like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I do fear that if I don't remember last week or 2 weeks ago, that, in a couple of years, what am I pulling from? What memories am I pulling from in order to understand myself and in order to understand the changes that I want to make and the reasons I find myself where I am if I cannot remember the things that have happened to me? The relationship between memory and identity operate almost like bidirectionally. So memory shapes identity by providing the experience, the feelings, the relationships, the events, basically like the raw material from which we understand and construct our sense of self. And then simultaneously, our identity shapes memory through our selective process. So by the process in which we attend to and interpret and retain certain experiences while allowing others to kind of fade away. It is through that selective remembering that we create a cohesive story about ourselves. I think that in order to make change in our lives, or in order to even realize that we want to change something in our lives, we must understand our past experiences, and we must understand the things that brought us to where we are in the present moment. Memory also helps us connect more deeply with ourselves. I think I've said that a million times by now. When we can access and articulate our memories in a nuanced and specific way with depth, we can develop a greater capacity for grace towards ourselves and empathy towards others. And we can understand how different lived experiences can shape different perceptions and self-conceptions, because we see how it happens with ourselves. Real stories are very limited right now, and it's hard to find. And a lot of people don't have access to real stories. And alongside a lack of in-between moments and a lack of time for and space for reflection, is that we start reducing parts of our lives and parts of who we are to data and information. So suddenly self-knowledge becomes this quantitative process. We think that self-knowledge is how many steps we've taken. It's, the percentage of body fat that we have, or like the calories that we keep track of, or the hours of sleep. We become a society that is so deeply obsessed with health because we think that that is what creates our sense of self. A person can never be reduced to metrics or to data points. I think this idea of the crisis of narration, one of the things that manifest is a loss of descriptive language and the capacity for sustained attention. Because I think in order to have language to be able to describe something and describe it in a specific way, you have to also have the attention to go alongside with it. Most of us just find ourselves in an environment, as I said before, that trains us to scan rather than to observe, and that trains us to consume rather than contemplate. And the ability to articulate what we see and how it affects us and why it affects us requires engagement and requires descriptive language. So this represents kind of like a vicious cycle where diminished attention produces kind of impoverished description, which undermines narrative capacity, which then further reduces the attention and impairs memory formation. And I really don't think that it's mainly because we don't have the language. I think we do have the language. I think it's that we have just turned our brains off and we are now kind of an autopilot, and we no longer find it valuable to spend time describing something if you can just show it. Journaling or having a writing practice or even just note-taking, it's a process of active remembering. It creates that space for reflection and for integration that I think social media very often prevents. And I think what happens when we're constantly scanning through information and we're going from one piece of information to another is that we are then engaging with kind of like a fragmented version of the world. And what we risk losing when we're constantly engaging with information that way is that we kind of lose that sense of what life is for. So having a writing practice can be a very deliberate way of participating and engaging with the world in a way that feels meaningful. A writing practice directly counters this swipe and scroll logic, which the smartphone demands the world according to our desires, whereas writing demands we meet the world on its terms. It requires slowness, it requires selection, it requires attention. It creates these in-between moments, these contemplative, necessary intervals for story formation. When we journal, we pull from our own memory, and it forces us to kind of sit with the experience long enough that you can articulate it and you can gather some meaning from it. There are so many different access points to journaling. There are so many ways to go about it. There's so many avenues that you can take. And I think it just requires truly pen and paper and a little discipline to show up for yourself and to persist through the discomfort of doing something that potentially you haven't done before or you haven't done in a while. I know that morning pages works for a lot of people, which is the practice that comes from The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I have done the morning pages on and off. Sometimes feel like 3 pages is a bit too much in the morning for me and for what I'm trying to get from my writing practice. So sometimes I just do 2 pages, sometimes I do 1. But again, it's, I think the thing about any sort of practice, what I've gathered from many years of engaging with different routines and different rituals is that they will shift and they will change, and you just need to kind of be flexible enough to adapt them for what you want out of them and for where you find yourself at that moment. It's this balance between the self-discipline needed to persist through something that you know is good for you and is good for your mental health, whilst also knowing that that thing will be there for you if you let go at any moment. And I think having that understanding and trying to strike that balance, although it can be often difficult, is how I've approached most things in my life. It's just knowing that if I drop the ball, it's fine. I don't have to fall into this all or nothing way of engaging with different routines. I can always revisit. I can always start again. I think morning pages can be great, but I think they can also be very daunting for people that have never journaled before, just like the blank page staring at you and you just have to come up with something. So I'm a huge fan of prompt journaling. Prompts don't have to be too deep. They don't have to all relate to each other. They can be different prompts every day. They can be the same prompt every day. It's basically you're just asking yourself something and answering the question. It can be as simple as, what have I read lately and why did I not enjoy it? Or what have I watched lately? What are the 3 things that I've watched and why did I enjoy them and why did I not enjoy them? It doesn't have to be something like, who am I and what I desire from this one life. It doesn't have to be that right from the get-go. You can get there, of course. But I think in the end, even if you're answering a question like, why did I like that book? It's always the same. It's always you're gathering data for the same question, which is the question of like who we are. And if that feels too much, then you can just start with note taking. So if there's a podcast that you enjoyed, what are your 3 takeaways from that podcast? Bullet point form. If you read a Substack essay, what are some of the quotes that you really liked that resonated? Write those down. What I will say about note taking is that it's very easy to let those notes die in your notes app. It's really easy for those to remain fragmented bits of information that do not contribute to a whole. So if you visit these consistently and if you keep them alive by reintegrating them into new notes that you create from different things that you've listened to, then you start something starts flourishing there. And when you are able to integrate what you have consumed in a way that pulls from your own experience, then you've created also a writing practice. Maybe you write an essay, maybe you write just a little paragraph. That is a way to also find meaning. You don't have to always just like write in your journal how you're feeling about something that someone did to you. There are many ways to understand yourself and to feel like you are part of the world. It doesn't have to only be about your feelings. And I guarantee that once you have all these notes and once you start finding patterns, that you'll want to create something with that you'll want to write something about it, or that you'll want to share it with someone. And in sharing that, you're using your own language and your own experience to create this kind of story that is cohesive for the other person to understand, and then the other person can contribute. And that's how we become more interesting people, everybody. In the end, I think it's simply about creating more moments of interruption, hopefully inviting some deep boredom in which you can let experience settle, you can let information settle, and from that you can reflect upon it, you can contemplate, and then gather a greater understanding for yourself and create a more meaningful, deeper, richer life in which you feel like a more active participant in the world. All just by like sitting down and writing a little bit. Okay, I think that is all for now. The sun is now shining, so I think I must go out. I think I must go out for a walk. So I shall see you very soon. Ciao, ciao.